governance. These organizations set policy frameworks, distribute federal funding, and provide best practice guidance that often aligns with left-wing values. Now, let me show you what the report actually says. This is from the State Leadership Initiative, which did the report. Here's what they state. They say, quote, "Our research details how professional associations such as the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and the American Association of Highway and Transportation Officials operate as a shadow government, advancing leftist agendas like diversity, equity, and inclusion in states where voters have rejected such policies." It says, as we report, the NAIC has questioned whether sex-based auto insurance ratings are, quote, unfairly discriminatory, challenging the foundations of actuary science for ideological gain. It says, similarly, the AASHTO's 2023 resolution to prioritize race, equity, and diversity and inclusion, DEI basically, has led to race-based mandates for transportation contracts in most states, including red ones, meaning basically very far-left ideologies being put in place where voters are not voting for those types of things. Further, in its states, while our article highlighted the influence of these associations, the problem is far more entrenched than we had room to describe in one piece. These groups are part of a broader ecosystem, backed by billionaire-funded NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and progressive think tanks, these groups that form a lot of left-wing policy, in fact, that amplify their reach. It says grant funding, often tied to these progressive policy requirements, pressures red state agencies to comply, even when it contradicts the conservative mandates of their constituents. It says this network operates with sophistication, embedding itself in state bureaucracies and eroding the federalist principles that protect state sovereignty. Now, a bit more on this. The programs of DEI, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are often, framed like that, both by critics and even by some of the groups that were pushing it, right? A basically shadow government. Now, on the advocacy side, people who want it, people who push for it, they didn't really try to hide this agenda. They framed it as a way to create what they called a multi-stakeholder capitalist system. They also had other words for it: community-based governance. For example, community schools, community hospitals, community government. What does that actually refer to? Same thing as multi-stakeholder capitalism. What is the community? Nonprofit organizations, NGOs, these various advocacy groups, businesses, investors, and public organizers, right? Community organizers or community leaders. These people, what it means, are given a share of government power, meaning power is stripped away from the elected government. You are no longer being led by the government you elect to be put in power. Instead, they want to share that with other stakeholders. Multi-stakeholder capitalism. And what that really means is that, again, for example, when it comes to the capitalism standpoint, who controls the economies, who influences government policy? Normally, in a constitutional republic like the United States, not a democracy, by the way, you could call it representative democracy, we elect our leaders. They're the ones who are supposed to not have special interest or anything like that. What this does is institutionalizes special interest. And it makes it so that if government wants to pass a policy, they need the approval of groups that say, well, is that inclusive? Is that equitable? Does that align with our agendas? When it comes to banks, for example, they were taking this into consideration, even debanking people who did not align with these ideas. When it came to climate policy, maybe you want to build a house or build a business. Well, you have to go through these organizations that take all their other things into consideration. The other issue is, of course, a lot of these get taxpayer money. Non-governmental organizations, advocacy groups, third-party organizations that were getting lots and lots and lots of money through things like USAID were then turning around and trying to get government power by using the power they were given. Even if you go to the local level within the United States, a police department needs to bring in DEI advisory groups which then have to educate the police on how to not be, biased or something like that. Teachers have to have non-biased training. Businesses have to have this type of training. And so what this does is it creates a third-party organization that can then dictate who stays, who gets fired, and who gets hired. And what they do is they subvert the leadership of these organizations and change the entire political trajectory of it. This applies not only to government agencies, which we saw happen. It is applied to the military. It is applied to big corporations. It is applied to the public school system. It is applied to just about state policy. In New York, for example, a lot of this is mandated. And it even applies to the school system, meaning we are being led by an unelected third-party organization, which is being, again, funded and propped up by these agendas. Now, on the opposition side to it, because, again, there are people who want that. They call it multi-stakeholder systems, like multi-stakeholder capitalism. They call it community-led government or community schools. The people who oppose it, they are saying also it's a type of subversion of government power. That basically what it did is it forced government agencies, schools, private businesses, just about everything, to bring in third-party organizations that basically worked like little Communist Party cells. If you live under a communist system, of course, in China, for example, if you have a business, you have to have a Communist Party office. If you have a school, there's the Communist Party branch of it. And that Communist Party branch can hire, can fire, can train, can re-educate, can punish. These organizations were doing the exact same thing. They were given power over the entire system within every place they were put. And when it comes to that also, there were criticisms of this, alleging that these organizations were using their power in undue ways, using it for partisan influence, using it to crush people they didn't agree with, using it to go after people whose values didn't align with theirs. And by firing and pushing out and canceling every single person of a different ideology, what they did was consolidated power to themselves. A type of silent coup d'etat that went through every single institution in our country and still maintains a lot of power, by the way. Even now, I'd say there are efforts to, slowly pull out some of these roots. Some of that is underway. Trump has been banning some of this, for example, but it's going piece by piece. There are legal challenges trying to stop every act from happening. Some groups still in power are trying to rename their initiatives to try to get around the directives and executive orders and everything else like that. Others, many of them who receive taxpayer money, are suing the government to try to block this from happening. And there are issues, of course, like other things, race-based hiring, race-based admissions, and this is not even within the, Harvards or Yales of the world or anything like that. Even in American military academies, this is a problem. Washington Times said this. It said the Justice Department announced a settlement Tuesday promising that the military academy at West Point and the Air Force Academy will stop using race-based admission preferences and instead select students, quote, exclusively on merit. It says government officials said the settlement is part of President Trump's effort to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion policies across the government. Now, I'd actually add to that, the issue you have, at least if we go by this report, alleging that a quote-unquote shadow government has taken power over the system. The problem you have is that the policies are not just things that just magically come about by themselves, poof out of thin air. They're being instituted, put into place by individuals, many of whom were brought in through these initiatives. Meaning, you have an embedded system of the individuals who've gotten those positions who are creating this thing. And, on the Trump side, they've worked to get rid of a lot of these people, within the government at least. But within third-party organizations, mandates for, trainings on, whatever narrative you want to use for it, a lot of this is still in place. Now, the whole DEI initiative, it also ended up labeling many conservative groups and organizations as being extremists. And some have also alleged this work to basically push out a certain subset of the population from any stance of influence. They label them, they malign them, they cancel them, they debank them, they destroy their reputations. Some of this even went beyond name calling, right? Some of it even found its way into legal designations, designations of extremism, designations of things even worse than that. Hot Air had a recent one. They say this: is Moms for Liberty, which you might remember is a moms organization, conservative values, going against things like trans policies in schools. They say, is Moms for Liberty a quote hate group on the order of the KKK?
Oh my
Well,
God.
last I checked, they haven't killed anybody. Last I checked, they're not burning crosses in people's yards. Last I checked, they're not doing anything on par with the KKK. How does that comparison even come about? Well, it says this: the Massachusetts Municipal Police Training Committee, a training committee, of course, one of these organizations put in place to then designate what people are being taught. Again, a third-party organization that is instituting these types of ideological policies, forcing it upon different institutions. It says they, quote, think so. On another topic, the Mexican drug cartels are now designated as terrorist organizations, and now Trump is ordering a global military action against drug cartels. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.